fun programs we do, right?
One of my favorite.
And Vicky was particularly impressed by the slide on the screen that says, "Hello, my name is Cranky Pants." Now, honestly, I think we could all wear that name badge from time to time. So I'm just going to put that right out there. It's not always other people's difficult behaviors that are causing an issue. Sometimes it's our difficult behavior that's causing an issue. So, as I said, sometimes the cranky pants might be the person that's wearing the name tag, and sometimes it might be the other people around us. As Vicky said, you got your handouts with your email link to enter the room today. I highly recommend that you print those handouts. If any of you have been with me before, you know I do fill in the blank handouts. Of course, they're not required, but it helps you follow along. I've given you a chance, excuse me, frog today. I've given you a chance to fill in the blanks so that you don't have quite as much writing to do if you try to take your own notes. And this is one of those topics where hopefully you don't even need it for a day or a week or 30 days or whatever. But it's one of those topics where you will need it from time to time. And this way you have a little bit of a mini manual if you print your handouts and follow along. And of course, I believe I may be right and Vicki can correct. I may be wrong is what I meant to say. Vicki can correct me, but I think you will have access to the recording as well. So if you miss something on the handouts, you can always go back and pick that up. So welcome to Cranky Coworkers. Thanks, Vicki. She said yes to the recording and other difficult behaviors. This is a quote I've seen a number of times. And it's odd because when I do certain programs, it seems like things come to the forefront within a few days of the program that I'm going to do. And just a couple of days ago, this particular quote was in a book that I'm reading. It's by Viktor Frankl, not the book, but the particular quote, who was a Holocaust survivor and a writer and an inspiration to a lot of people. And he said, between stimulus and response, there is space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. In other words, when somebody has that cranky pants attitude or they're exhibiting a difficult behavior, and I just noticed that on your handouts, the word difficult is spelled wrong. It is so hard to find good help. That means me because I'm the one that did the handout. So my apologies that the word difficult is spelled wrong. But the theory behind this entire quote is that something happens to us. It's somebody said something, an incident happened, a situation happened, a circumstance, and we will have some sort of reaction or response, but there is a space in there where we can make a choice. And that's really what we're going to talk about today is what choices are we making in that space? So the first thing to do is address emotional intelligence a little bit. There's a picture of a book there that I have found extremely helpful in my own journey to think about my emotions and how I deal with other people's difficult behaviors and even how I deal with my own. And it's called the Emotional Intelligence Quick Book. Excellent book, fairly easy read. There's another one that I didn't even have time to put on the slides that I just got recently, and I'm only on chapter, I think, 4 now, but it's called Emotional Agility, which is also a good book. But just be thinking about our own emotions as we're dealing with difficult behaviors. So basically what emotional intelligence says is that we have two minds. We have a mind that thinks, which is our rational mind, and a mind that feels, which is our emotional mind. Now, technically, we should be using both parts of our mind when we are dealing with issues. But just say yes in the chat box if you've ever known anybody that goes right to the emotional part of their mind and never applies any rational thought to that. Or if you know somebody that goes right to the rational part of their mind and never applies any emotion. Exactly. So our minds are perfectly capable of helping us combine those two to handle things in a productive and effective way. But we can get especially the emotional part of our brain, we can get very wrapped up in that. And it doesn't matter how many ideas of rational thought somebody tries to explain to us, we are not going there. We're going to stay stuck in our emotional mind. Now, obviously, when we're dealing with difficult behaviors, when we're stuck in our emotional mind, we do not allow ourselves to apply any thought and logic to that particular situation. We just keep getting more mired in the emotional part of our mind. But thinking about having those two sides of our brains, know that the good news is some people are more naturally high in emotional intelligence. I've had a couple friends in the past, not a lot, honestly, but I can think of two in particular. One has since passed away, one is still a friend of mine, and they're more highly emotionally intelligent just naturally. But here's the good news: we can change our emotional intelligence. We can improve it throughout our lives. How do I know that? Because I've done it. Now, I'm not perfect. And on an A to Z continuum, I might have started studying this 15 years ago, and I might have been at what I would say maybe a K or an L, where sometimes I got better in those areas and sometimes I slid backwards a little bit. But I think now I'm maybe at a P or a Q most of the time. I will never get to a Z. Nobody ever gets to a Z. There was a book written many years ago, probably 10 or 15 now anyway. It was called The Joy of Conflict Resolution. And the fellow that wrote the book said that he interviewed his professors that had taught him conflict resolution when he was in college. And he interviewed his two favorite professors on the topic. He called them into a room. They were all three together. And as they were discussing the theories and so forth, the two professors started arguing over which theory was best. And he said it was just so obvious that as human beings, we'll never get perfect at this. These two had, PhDs plus in conflict resolution, and they still started arguing about it. So we just need to understand that we have a lot of control when it comes to our own emotional intelligence. Just knowing that is kind of a relief if we really think about it. It's the capacity for recognizing our own feelings and those of others. It helps motivate ourselves, because I don't believe in extrinsic outside motivation being long term, long lasting. But if we can motivate ourselves through our emotional intelligence, that can be sustainable. But it's also a part of successfully managing our emotions in ourselves and our relationships. It helps determine how effectively we express our emotions. And it also determines how well people listen to us. Why do you think emotional intelligence, our own, has any impact on how well someone listens to us? Would you just type a brief thought that came to mind on that comment into the chat box? Why would it determine how well people listen to us? Tara said we can frame our arguments in ways they can understand or relate to if we're using our emotional intelligence, right? If we're not stomping around and slamming our hand down on a table or harumphing around or sighing or rolling our eyes, because when we do that, people respond to our behaviors, don't they? And they're not going to listen as well. So, absolutely, we can use emotional intelligence to be more logical, to be more calm in a situation. And so people are more likely to listen to us. Daniel Goleman's book is the first book I read on emotional intelligence. Many years ago, a client asked me to do some work on this, and I had heard of the term, but I'd never really studied it. And I said, well, let me really research it first before I commit. And so I read Daniel Goleman's book, and I knew by reading that his book was called Emotional Intelligence: Why It Can Matter More Than IQ. I knew when I read the book that this was something that I wanted to delve deeper into, if for no other reason than it was already opening my eyes to me and my emotional intelligence or lack thereof. It was a rather dry book because it had a lot of research in it, which was great. It had a lot of theoretical kinds of things in it, which was great. That's what I needed as my foundation. And then I went back and read that other book I mentioned, The Emotional Intelligence Quick Book, which kind of took everything in Goleman's book and said, okay, Linda Bruno, here it is in your terms, which was a little easier to understand. So the whole concept comes down to 4 elements of emotional intelligence, or components, if you want to call them that. The first 2 are self-awareness and self-management. Remember, we touched on that right at the beginning. We said it's the capacity for recognizing our feelings and the feelings of other people and then managing those feelings in ourselves and others. It does not say manipulation anywhere in these components. It says self-awareness and self-management. The key thought process, though, is we need to remember is that we can't have social awareness and relationship management until we've dealt with ourselves, can we? We can pretend that we're very socially aware. We can pretend that we know how to manage our relationships. But if we're not paying attention to our own emotions and whether or not we're managing them, it's going to be very difficult to tap into other people's emotions and then manage those relationships. And again, it doesn't say relationship manipulation. It says relationship management because now I realize because I'm self-aware, I'm managing my own emotions. Think about difficult behaviors. You're frustrating me. You hurt my feelings, whatever it is, but I manage those emotions so that I can be aware of how my response is going to affect our relationship. Can be extremely helpful. By the way, much of what we're going to talk about today is also extremely helpful in your personal life. Please use this information to help you have better relationships in your personal life. Of course, it helps in the workplace, but it can be even more meaningful in your personal life. So, what does this involve? Well, self-awareness this is a key point, recognizing the feeling as it happens. When that person is exhibiting difficult behaviors or they're being cranky and you have an emotion and you will, period, you just will, you'll have some kind of an emotional response to their behaviors. Emotional intelligence has to do and self-awareness with when we recognize it as it happens. Reflection is good. If I sit here and it's Tuesday and I look back to last Thursday and I think, oh, I got really upset when that person said that, it's good to reflect on how we felt and maybe how we need to respond the next time. But it's not self-awareness because we can't manage it if we're looking backward at what happened a day ago or 2 hours ago. We can only manage our emotions as they happen, right? And this particular element is also a key to better decision making. What do you think that means? Why would self-awareness have anything to do with decision making? I kind of think of this in terms of, for myself, the big piece of the decision making when I'm self-aware is what I allow to come out of my mouth. Yes, you're more aware of yourself, right? Helps me think before I react. And I like that you use the word react, Gwendolyn, because we're in a difficult situation or difficult behaviors. We're often reacting instead of responding, aren't we? We just are boom, reacting to whatever they said or however they're acting. So if we have self-awareness, remember the emotional part and the rational part of my brain. I'm emotional about how they're behaving, but the rational part says, maybe you should slow your roll a bit. Maybe you should just manage the emotions that you're feeling about this situation. And so it actually impacts our decision making. Robert said, if you're self-aware, you can better manage what you say. Exactly. Because you can't have self-management if you're not aware, right, Robert? You've got to be self-aware. So it's huge, folks. I'm just going to be really dramatic here, but very truthful when I tell you that when I really immersed myself in this about 15 years ago, it changed my life. This and knowing about personalities, because it changed how I looked at myself. And that's what I'm challenging you about today is it may change how you look at yourself. And I hope it does. So what are some aspects? Knowing which emotions I'm feeling and why. Another key point, there will be several in today's session. What am I feeling and why am I feeling that way? Well, often we will say, because they made me mad. They didn't make you do anything. You chose to be angry at them. You chose to be frustrated with them. You chose to resent them. And usually there's something underlying that initial response. So why am I feeling that way? I will tell you that oftentimes for me, when especially if I'm hurt or I may sometimes even when I'm angry, When I really look underneath that particular emotion, it's because of low self-esteem that I had when I was a kid, and I'm still carrying around a little bit of that. And so that's what changed my life when I looked at this and I said, oh, okay, the reason I'm reacting that way, yeah, they might have been a jerk, but so what? That's their issue, right? That's the way we should logically look at it a lot of times when we're experiencing difficult behaviors from other people. We should just look at it and say, as my late sister said, she said to me one day when she had been dealing with a coworker two of them were just being horrible to her, sitting a foot of away in the break room and making fun of her. And we would talk about it week after week. And I said, that's their issue. That's just, you have to understand there's an issue with them dealing with their own feelings because they're jealous of, she got attention from the boss because she was very helpful. She worked in a factory, but she was always very helpful. And one day she called me and she said, you know what? I figured it out. And I said, what's that? And she said, I'd hate to live inside their heads. And all of a sudden, that burden of being resentful and hurt and all of that was taken away from my sister because she recognized it was on them, their behavior. Did it feel great to be treated that way? Of course not. It never will feel great. But when we can sort of cut the ties that they are causing us to go through this day in a miserable fashion, when we can cut that tie and say, I have a choice. Remember what Viktor Frankl said? Between the stimulus and the response is a choice. So with self-awareness, we want to realize the connection between what we feel and what we think, do, and say. There's a connection. If I'm angry, what am I going to be thinking about? They did this and they always do this. What am I going to do? I'm going to stomp around. What am I going to say? Things that I cannot get back. It's that old toothpaste in the tube theory. It comes out of your mouth. You never get it back. Yes, you can apologize, but a lot of people never forget what you said. So realize the connection between your feelings and what you think, do, and say the next time you're dealing with somebody else's difficult behaviors. Recognizing how my feelings affect my performance, and not just my performance, but also my relationships, right? Because again, toothpaste out of the tube. How will my feelings affect my performance and my relationships? That's part of self-awareness. By the way, when you have questions as we go along, please feel free to pop them into the chat box. Or if it's something a little deeper or maybe something a little more touchy, personal, you're not really sure you want to share it in a chat box that a session is being recorded, drop me an email. You have my email address on the bottom of the first page of your handouts. And I'm hoping that it's the right one because my system picks up the wrong one. So I'm going to type it in here just to make sure everybody has it. It was on the front slide, but I just want to make sure. lindasworkshops@gmail.com. Very simple. Drop me an email. Let me know if you need anything from me. If you just need me to help be the objective observer that says, here's what I'm hearing in your email to me. So I'm always happy to do that for you. So the next thing about self-awareness is knowing my own strengths. That's a good thing to know, right? But a lot of times when we're dealing with difficult behavior, we assume that we're working in our strengths, but sometimes we're not. We have limits about how much we can handle. We have weaknesses within that particular behavior situation. And so if we know that, that makes us more self-aware, doesn't it? And then that gives us the opportunity when we are more self-aware to stop at the stimulus and decide how we're going to respond. Learning from our experience. Maybe we know that a certain person always acts this way when this happens. Maybe we need to lessen our exposure to that. Maybe we need to be more careful about how we're responding. So learning from our experience is part of self-awareness, which absolutely makes sense for us. Recognizing the effects of my emotions. What kind of effects do your emotions have on you? Just in general, can you think of anything? Have any of you ever had your emotions drain your energy? Yes, exactly, Gwendolyn, causing headaches. I was just going to say the next one would have been health, because when our energy is drained, we're fatigued, we're exhausted, we have headaches, we have high blood pressure, we don't sleep well. Yes, it raises our blood pressure. And here's the thing we really need to grasp in this emotional intelligence piece when the way it connects to our health is that all the things y'all listed can then cause more severe problems. And so just learning the skill, and it is a skill and sometimes an art of self-awareness and self-management can help us with these things. I don't know about you all, but I'm always for something that's going to help me be healthier. And this can help you with that. Being able to recognize a bad mood is another part of self-awareness because we've probably all experienced this. Somebody says, "Are you okay? You seem to be really upset." Or they avoid you because you are the grumpy kitty in the group because you're in a bad mood and you've allowed someone else's behaviors to affect your behavior. They didn't directly do that to you. You've allowed that to happen. So being able to recognize the bad mood. So we move into self-management because you can have self-awareness. I have an acquaintance, I wouldn't really call him a friend that I've known for years, haven't seen him in a long time, but he was always that person that was, he would have said, he didn't use these exact words, but I'm self-aware. I know who I am. You just got to accept me the way I am. Okay, I guess you can call that self-awareness, but it doesn't even come close to the idea of self-management, does it? So if he's only self-aware and he is not trying to manage his emotions and he's not trying to be socially aware or having relationship management, then he is not in any respect emotionally intelligent. So self-management is the next piece of our puzzle. What are some aspects of that? Well, obviously managing those disruptive emotions. Name a few disruptive emotions that you've experienced in your own life. Just pop them into the chat box. There are no right or wrong answers. This is about us as individuals. What are some disruptive emotions that you've experienced, especially when you're dealing with other people's difficult behaviors? Yeah, Robert, anger. Amber said annoyance. Joe said anger. Robert said frustration. Absolutely. They're disruptive, aren't they? Resentment, rejection, Tara said. Intimidation is one that I've dealt with in the past, very disruptive. Impatience, all of the above, right? So if we have self-managing capabilities, silent treatment, yeah, that's a result of our disruptive emotion, isn't it, Robert? We give people the silent treatment or we get that sometimes because of our own disruptive emotions. Absolutely. Think how really positive it would be if we did come in today at a K on an A to Z continuum as far as our emotional intelligence, our ability to be self-aware and self-management, and we moved pretty much permanently toward an O or a P or a Q, wouldn't that make your life better? But here's the thing, you're the only one that can do it. I can't do it for you. Your coworkers can't do it for you, but you can do this. That's why you're here today. I know you can do this, especially when you're dealing with other people's cranky behavior and other difficult behaviors that they exhibit and that we ourselves exhibit from time to time. Another piece of this is staying calm and composed in those upsetting situations. Not always easy to do. And we have to take that space in the middle of the stimulus and the response to stay calm and composed, don't we? Because if they're crammed together, stimulus response, rarely does calm and composed have enough wiggle room to get in there. It's always the explosive stuff that's coming up. So staying calm and composed is a part of self-management. Thinking clearly under pressure. When that patron is right in front of you and they're screaming at you or they're pointing at you or they're accusing you of something, self-management helps you think clearly under that kind of pressure. And it is pressure, isn't it? Because everybody, you all, I know, I don't know you all, but I know that as doing the jobs that you're doing, you want to help everybody and you want to make everybody happy. And yet you also know that there are people that come into your environment, whether it's coworkers or patrons or supervisors or in your personal life, that sort of flip a switch for you because they're just so in your face sometimes. So how do you think clearly under that kind of pressure? And then a part of self-management too is admitting when it is our mistake, so that we can move forward in any kind of a situation. So that's part of it, isn't it? Being willing to admit that. Self-awareness and self-management are obviously internal. They're about you, But again, if we never get there, then we can't really move forward into social awareness and relationship management. So it's about us. Please understand what I'm saying here. Yes, exactly, Joe. Perish the thought. Me get upset, me make mistakes, me be the difficult behavior. Perish the thought. I love that. Thank you. Self-awareness at its peak, right, is knowing that it's sometimes our reactions that are causing as much of a problem for ourselves as anybody else. So feeling your emotions isn't a sign of weakness. Let me be very clear about that. I want you to feel your emotions. You can't deal with them. You can't manage them unless you allow yourself to feel them. And as I said, if you can ask why you're feeling this way, you may not even like the answer, but at least it's in front of you now and you know how to manage them, because allowing your emotions to control you might be a sign of weakness. Now, let me be very clear here too. There are times your emotions are going to control you, right? Period. The end. They just are. Just because you're tired, you're hangry, or you're hungry, or you've got other things going on in your life. And so sometimes your emotions are going to get the best of you. The key here is improvement, right? Baby steps. Let's do better at it. Let's not let it happen as often as it could. That's what we're talking about. So feel those emotions, learn how to manage them. Don't allow them to control you. And also acknowledge that emotions can be and often are unconscious, or they're in our subconscious, however phrase you want to use that. I've looked this up 2 or 3 times and I never know which one to use. So let's just say we don't even know they're there. Okay. I don't have to worry about which word to use. We have little or no control when we are swept by emotion, or even over what that particular emotion will be. There have been times I've been sad about something and I find myself thinking, why does this make me sad? I don't even have any control over that, do I? It comes over me. I don't know what the emotion's going to be, but I do have some control over how long it lasts, how I react to it or respond to it, and how I express it. How cool is that, folks? Look at how much control we have. It's going to come. Emotions are going to come to us. How awful would it be if we didn't have emotions? So yes, we're going to have to acknowledge that they will come to us. I saw a little clip many years ago before I even started studying this topic, and I could never find, I think it was like a PBS special or something, but it was a documentary about a fellow who the emotional part of his brain, which is the amygdala, was dead. So he felt no emotion. He couldn't watch movies. He could, but it meant nothing, zero, zilch, because there was no emotion, and movies are all about emotions. He couldn't carry on a conversation with somebody that had any kind of emotion in it effectively because the emotions were gone. And the documentary was about how horrible that is to live through that. So be glad for your emotions, right? And then figure out what you're going to do with them. How are you going to manage them? You can tell I'm excited about this topic. Like I said, it was life-changing for me, and I want to help other people find out how wonderful it is to recognize that we can be self-aware and self-manage our emotions. I would love to know. I've read the research, but it's still hard for me to grasp how they decide that we have 27 emotions every waking hour. I know they put little electrodes on and so forth, but still, it seems a little odd that they can track that. But we can all agree that we have a lot of emotions, right? 27 an hour is 150,000 a year. On the average, you will experience almost 2 million emotions at work. So what that means is every day is bring your emotions to work day. Now, here's the other thing to consider. It's also bring your emotions to work day for every other person you interact with. So if you think of this like a big bubble, think of all the emotions that are floating around in your environment at any given time, because everybody is experiencing different emotions around you. And then you also have your emotions to deal with. So it's a lot. And if we are aware of that, we can be a little better at managing them. So one difficult behavior that I hear over and over again is about negative coworkers. So let's just be honest with each other. You cannot control others. Let me read you something that just came in my email yesterday. See what I mean about these things popping up when I'm doing a particular program? And this is from Harvard Business Review. I'm on their email list. I subscribe to the magazine, lots of good information. They call it their today's tip. And it said, make peace with a difficult colleague. So the first thing they say is consider the possibility they might never change. How can you make peace with their flaws and not build resentment? So what they say is clarify your own principles. Do you even want to bother to try to make this a better situation? Only you know that. They say it in a lot longer terms. Separate your emotions from your actions and consider how these emotions have shaped your behavior. Kind of the same things we've been talking about, right? The third one they say is reflect on the whole story. Take a step back. Are there factors you've ignored? From my perspective, what else is their baggage is what I always like to think of, because we all have baggage and it contributes to our bad behavior sometimes, doesn't it? They said, how might you be contributing to the problem? Are you being unfair about their behaviors? Be willing to shape a new mindset about that person. And then forgive and adjust your posture. And what they mean by that is consciously choose to let go of your negative feelings toward that person. Consciously choose. Imagine that. Stimulus, response, and the space in the middle. And then they also say, just as important, forgive yourself for any part you've played in the problem and for expecting someone to be something they're not, because we're not going to change them. I think that might be the next one. Imagine that. You can't control them and you can't change them. So their summary was choose to be more gracious, hospitable, and kind. I would like to add to that, choose to control the aspects of the interaction that we can, right? Because we're not going to control them and we're not going to change them as much as we try. Somebody said to me once, the only person I've ever changed is a baby, you know? So we need to know that. Understand that you can control how you respond to them, and you should. It's not going to happen all the time. I always like to give people that grace, because I never want to be the person that's talking to you and quote lecturing you about how it should always be this way. This is how you should always behave, because we are human beings and it's never going to happen. But we can tweak it and we can be better at it. And every time we're better at it, we pat ourselves on the back and we do better even the next time. You can use this workplace negativity to hone your own skills. Stand up for yourself. You don't have to be aggressive. You don't have to be in their face, but you can certainly be, remember, calm and composed in disruptive situations. So stand up for yourself. Practice assertiveness. That's not about aggressiveness. Assertiveness is just holding your ground. Aggressiveness is in somebody's face. I'm making that face when I'm doing that. I'm so glad you can't see me. And set boundaries when you need to. If somebody makes you feel bad, it's okay to set boundaries with them and be assertive with them and not let them make you feel inferior, because you have to give them consent for them to make you feel inferior. So set boundaries. When someone presents you with yet another sky is falling negative scenario, deal with the situation, because there might be a real situation, and then exit. You don't have to get drawn into that negativity. You don't have to be a part of the negativity. You don't have to stir it, right? So leave if you need to. In order to decide if it's a real situation, you need to practice your listening skills. Is it really something that needs to be dealt with? How am I going to do that effectively? Not by just pouncing on the negative verbal aspect of it that's coming at me, but to listen for the key aspects of what the situation is, and then ask those clarifying questions to find out what really needs to be done in this negative situation, and managing your own stress level as it unfolds. And this is tough. When somebody's being negative and it is a real situation, you have situations in your library that are very negative. Managing your stress as it unfolds, to say, I can remain calm here. I'm going to do the best I can do in this situation. And then I'm going to go home and I'm not going to have to deal with this in my home environment. When it's a negative person that you're dealing with, develop a vocabulary of quick getaway phrases is what I call them. I read somewhere else once that said they call them diplomatic departures. So what are some of the things that you can say to remove yourself from this negative environment that someone else has created? You can say something as simple as, I need to make a call. Now, here's the thing. I don't want you to ever lie to anybody, but just know there's always something in your environment you could be doing, right? Instead of being involved in this negative interaction. So you could say, here are some of them that you might say. I need to make a call. I need to check on my coworker, and just fill in the blank with a name of somebody you're actually going to check in with. I need to finish this report. I need to send an email. What are some of the things that you might be able to say to have a getaway phrase, to have a diplomatic, love that term, departure? So just be willing to do that, because it can be very helpful so that you can get away. When it arises from gossip, which negativity sometimes does, and it creates a difficult environment, doesn't it? It's a difficult behavior. Then you can say things like, are you sure? I was thinking that's not what really happened. Or, did you hear that directly? Now, this doesn't always stop people from gossiping, because we gossip as human beings, don't we? But what it might do is it might limit the gossip that they share with you. And although we would love to be able to stop them from gossiping completely, that may or may not happen. Remember, we said we can't change people, we can't control them, but maybe we lessen what we're exposed to, because it's easy to get drawn into that, isn't it? Now, the one kind of gossip I do promote, if you will, and I do encourage is, did you hear that John was the first person to make Mrs. Smith smile since she's been coming here for 2 years? That's the kind of gossip that's good news. So good news gossip is good. We can deal with that. So to disengage from gossip, how do you also do that? You can express your inability to do anything about it. Even if the gossip is true, yeah, I wish I could do something about it, but it's out of my control. And you just disengage. Disengaging is important with difficult behaviors, isn't it? Negativity can also lead to drama, because people want attention. It is the human condition. We all like attention. And in essence, that is really what gossip is all about. Because look at me, I know something you don't, and I'm going to share it with you. If you're nice to me, I'll share it with you. Well, in reality, I'd rather you wouldn't share it with me. So it can also lead to drama, because that person is probably trying to get attention. So when it gets to drama, refuse to engage. It's one of my key phrases. I said this even to somebody that I was working with once. They were getting a little, I'm going to call it snarky. And I knew that that's what they were doing. And I said, I'm going to choose not to engage. And I said it with a smile, and it sort of took them off guard. Was I frustrated that they were even behaving that way? Sure. Could I change their behavior? No, but I could change it with me, because I actually verbalized that I wasn't going to engage. Now, sometimes you aren't going to verbalize it. You're just going to refuse to engage. You're not going to join the negativity party. You're not going to take the negativity bait, and you're not going to feed the negativity beast. And I would venture to say that within the next week to 10 days, all of us will be around somebody who starts in on the negative. Now, if you've got a friend that just needs to vent to you, that's not what I'm talking about here. If you've got a coworker that just needs to get something off their chest, that's not what I'm talking about. We know the negative Nells, right? Or the negative Neds. We know the people that negativity is what they thrive on. So why engage with that? And don't be that person, right? That's a big one. So what are you going to do? You're going to ignore the rant or give honest feedback. Well, I understand your frustration, but since I can't control it, I'm not going to even discuss it. You can ignore the rant completely, or you can give honest guidance and feedback. Is there something you can do about this? Sometimes the negativity shows up in the phrase, yeah, but. I call these yeah, but people. And you want to hang around with you bet people. Big difference, right? Isn't it a pretty day? Yeah, but we need rain. Isn't the rain nice finally? Yeah, but I live in Florida. Why isn't the sun shining? It's that kind of a thing where everything you say, it's yeah, but. So just get yourself out of that situation. If you can't get out of it, confront it. What is going on here? Is it really what they're saying? Give them gentle feedback about how their negativity is affecting the team, affecting you, affecting their own thought process. If you can, some of this is strategic, isn't it? You have to be discerning. How well do you know this person? What kind of a bond do you already have with them? How can you help them? So give them gentle feedback when you can. When we're talking about negativity, a victim mentality can be a particularly draining kind of negativity. It's that woe is me, nothing ever goes right. Why are they always mean to me? Why do I always have to go through this? It's that kind of thing. And it's very draining if you're in that kind of an environment. So what do? You try to steer them towards something positive. And I'm not talking about toxic positivity, oh, don't worry about it, it'll all be okay, or the ignoring the things that are happening, but you're trying to steer them towards something positive. In my mind, it's always trying to find the silver lining. Am I going to be happy about certain situations? Maybe not. Some situations, it's hard to be happy about the situation itself, isn't it? But can I take a little piece of that? Maybe something I learned through it, maybe one little part of it that I can be effective at combating, and I can take that and turn it to the positive. So try to steer them towards something positive. Keep in mind, if you are the negative person, that these things that can be helpful for you as well. Nudge them for solutions. If they just keep whining about something and they're a victim of something, is there something they can do to get away from that situation, or to lessen that situation, or to change that situation? Here's the thing. A lot of times negative people live rent-free in your mind, right? Because they start in on this. I think of this in general with the news. And it's always been this way with the news. We're subjected to a lot more of it now, but negative news has always sold. Somebody said to me the other day, I remember during the pandemic, somebody started to try to start a positive news station, and it faltered. And the reason it faltered is the human mind is drawn to negativity. It just is. It's how we're wired. So I actually subscribe to a newsletter called inspiremore.com. And every day they send me a list of articles or photos or whatever that are more uplifting. And I do that to offset all the negativity. So don't give negative people free rent in your mind, because that negativity feeds on itself, and you will become the negative person that nobody wants to be around if you allow that. Be aware of distance. What kind of distance do you need to have with negative people? Would you type something into the chat box? I've got 3 things written down for myself, but what do you think? What kind of distance do you need to create with negative people? I like that, Joe. Lots of distance. Limit time. It could be time distance, couldn't it? Sometimes it helps to live in a different state. Yes, it does, because you don't have to answer the phone, right? So that's one way to help with that. So sometimes it actually is physical distance, right? Whether it's going to another room because they're in the same building with you, or whether it's not answering the phone because they are in a different state, earplugs. Yes, absolutely. If you can. That some of you may think, oh, that I don't think that was a serious comment, but absolutely, if you need to block that negativity, sometimes that might be your only option. So physical distance, mental distance, even if you can hear them, you have a barrier built up that you let that negativity bounce back off. And you can use my sister's thought process. I'm glad I don't live inside their heads. I'm glad I don't live inside their heads. And I've said that to myself since she passed away. She passed away 5 years ago next week. And I still use that saying in my own mind, or said it out. I've said it out loud to myself, where I'm glad I'm not living inside their heads. It's a mental distance, isn't it? And of course, we need emotional distance. If we feel ourselves being drained by them, we need that emotional distance. So whatever you need to do for yourself, be aware of creating distance. You may still need to work with this person, so be sure you still interact effectively with them and you respect them. You want to interact effectively with respect, because you might still need to work with them, or you might still need to be a part of the family, either one, if it's work or personal. If you have to take the negative person's behavior to a higher level in your workplace, don't allow yourself to make it personal about them. And if you have to take it to a higher level, there will likely be repercussions, right? Somebody's going to create an issue over this. Sometimes it is that toxic that it needs to be done. Hopefully, it never will be for you. But then also be aware that the person at the higher level might say, have you actually spoken directly with that person? And then you have to decide whether that's worth going to that particular level. So to offset negative coworkers, spend more time with uplifting people, the you bet people. What words do you think of when you think of positive people? Just type a couple into the chat box. What words do you think of when you think of positive people? Inspiring, happy, fun to be with. Just the word uplifting, right? Positive people. Not rose-colored glasses where they don't accept reality. I call myself a realistic optimist because I'm very realistic about issues in my life and in other people's lives. But I also am optimistic about the fact that I do have a lot of choices in the things that go around me every day. Attractive. And Gwendolyn, it's not necessarily physical attractiveness, is it? It's that they're attractive because you enjoy being around them. It's that high emotional intelligence that they seem to have, where they have empathy and compassion and caring, but they also don't get drawn into the negativity of those kinds of things. So, uplifting people. You see this little graphic here: dance like no one's watching, sing like no one's listening, love like you'll never be hurt, play like there's no winners, behave like mom's watching, give like you have plenty, and smile. Exactly, Gwendolyn, attracted to their positivity. Now, I do know I've had one person in my life that was what I will call toxically positive because they never wanted to face issues that were going on, and it actually created more problems for them, right? So there is that toxic positivity. It's a real thing, but we certainly can be realistically positive so that we are not always dwelling on the negative. Leave the negative, toxic people behind, even if it's only in your mind, because sometimes we can't live in another state, right, Robert? Sometimes they're in our environment, but we have to leave them behind, even if it's just mentally. And just think, I'm so glad I'm not living in that kind of a mindset myself. Don't take it personally, even when it feels personal, even when you're pretty sure it's meant to be personal, because that's their aim sometimes when they're negative. So you just have to let that go. Don't let them impact you that way. It can always hurt a little bit, but you have control over how deep the dig goes. Change the subject sometimes when they're being negative. So how about that weather? How about those bears or whatever? Change the subject when you can. And recognize how easy it is to absorb negativity. Jim Rohn, who is considered a guru in positive psychology, leadership skills, those kinds of things, working with people, he says you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Now, I heard somebody just a couple weeks ago say, I'm not sure I believe that. Well, I think maybe I would change that to the 5 people you intentionally spend the most time with, if I were going to really flesh out that statement. Are you drawn to the negative people? Because sometimes people are drawn to the negative people, and then it multiplies, doesn't it? But it's very easy for us to absorb the negativity because that truly is the way our brains are wired. It's called the lizard brain. People back in caveman days needed to have a lizard brain so that they were looking for the negative so that they could survive. So you're the average of the 5 people you intentionally spend the most time with. Be aware of that. Think in your mind right now, who are the 5 people I'm around the most? Does that tip the scale toward the negative, or does it tip my scale toward the positive? And then what can you do about that if it's more toward the negative? I have friends that I've been friends with for decades, and I will only talk to them when I feel like I've got myself built up in a positive way, because everything they talk about is negative. Somebody said, why don't you just get them out of your life? Because I love these people. They're good people. They've been with me through a lot of hard times. I don't want them out of my life. I just don't want to be subjected to the negativity long-term and constantly. Keep an eye and an ear open for situations you can actually help with, because we talked about that when we're listening to a negative person. Is there something I can actually help with? Sometimes people, I posted the other day, we have this ongoing thing in our community. I don't participate in Facebook, but I do pop into my community's Facebook page because there's a lot of helpful information there, and it can get dramatic. And there's an ongoing thing about critters, and some people love animals to the extent where they don't want anybody hurt or anything like that. Other people could care less. So there's always that ongoing thing. Well, we had a pair of swans last year, and we now have a pair of beautiful geese that are hanging around, and there's debate about that. And so I posted, I don't know if you saw the article, I posted the article, it was from inspiremore.com, about the goose that was a widow, and she was a cemetery mascot. She and her mate were cemetery mascots. They'd been there for years. The mate died, and she was a widow, and she wasn't eating, and she wasn't around very much. She would go hide. And so the cemetery manager put an ad in a paper looking for a mate for this widowed goose. And somebody read this ad, and a farmer, I think, and he had lost the female, and he brought the mate. And I just thought, maybe I can uplift somebody with that. And several people just put smiley faces beside it and so forth, just to have something negative pushed to the side so that we look at the positive of this. Don't let negative coworkers hold you hostage. Don't let them physically back you into a corner and spew all this stuff onto you. Have those diplomatic departure phrases, those getaway phrases prepared, because people will hold you hostage, because what they're trying to do is convince you how awful everything is. I don't want to participate in that, do you? So don't engage, and don't let them hold you hostage. Are they expressing real negativity, or is this just part of their personality? Some people have a negative bent. Some people are just negative about a current situation. If it's part of their personality, that's when you need to be more tuned into lessening your exposure, because it will be a constant loop with them of everything that's negative. Practice positive affirmation when appropriate. Now, I think this has been overused. The term has been overused in recent years. But what I'm talking about here is when they say something positive, you say, "Oh, I'm so glad you noticed that. I love it when you mention XYZ," or whatever. When we are affirmed in something, we are more likely to repeat it. There is an old saying that says, "What gets rewarded gets repeated." So if you're rewarding their negativity by jumping in with both feet and agreeing and getting negative yourself and spiraling down, they've just found a friend. But if you are repeating, if you're rewarding what they're doing when they're talking about something positive, they will be more likely to repeat that something positive, not that specific thing, but to try to be more positive. Supply positive alternatives with the yeah, but people. Can you supply something? Can you fill in the blanks for them and help them see that things aren't really all that bad? So positive alternatives with the yeah, but people. Here's a big one. You all know this, but it's hard to do. Choose your battles. Do you really need to engage to that extent with this particular person when you know they are going to think of it as a wrestling match to see if they can give you more negatives than you can give them positives? Choose your battles, because the tendency, somebody was telling me the other day that they have read, it takes 4 positive interactions to overcome 1 negative interaction. When you think about your environment and who you're around and you yourself and how you're behaving and responding, are you at a 4-to-1 ratio? Because you will be more positive and more uplifting yourself if you are. So choose your battles. Which ones are worth going after? Don't waste time and energy trying to analyze or refute every negative comment, because some people look at that as a challenge, don't they? Oh, good. It's time to really engage in this. I will tell them exactly why everything is terrible. So don't waste your time and energy doing that. If it's something that's important to you, then certainly that's a battle you should pick. But don't waste your time and energy to try to refute everything. There are a lot of reasons for negativity, right? I think we can all agree with that. Type one into the chat box. Why might people be negative? Just in general. Tara said fear. That's a big one, isn't it? And we don't, I mean, I'm not going to go up to somebody and say, well, I'm feeling kind of negative today because I'm afraid. It's an underlying thing, isn't it? Sandra said past hurts. Absolutely. And so there is, then that would equal lack of trust sometimes, right, Sandra? I'm going to respond this way because I will be negative before you have a chance to hurt me. And Amber said, just general stress. Life right now is pretty stressful for almost everybody I know, simply because of what's going on in the world. It's stressful. Robert said they're frustrated with life. Yes. And it could be anything. And it could be something, couldn't it, Robert, that wouldn't even frustrate you, but something's going on for them where we think, really, lighten up. It's not that big of a deal. But for them, it is. Life is hard, Joe. You are absolutely right. And it doesn't matter how much money you have, how good your relationships are, whatever else. Health issues can hit, money can be lost, relationships can be harmed, all of the above, being overwhelmed. And it could be overwhelmed with work. It could be overwhelmed with obligations. It could be any number of things. The price of living is very stressful, isn't it? Right now, it's very stressful. I have been traveling since the pandemic, and I got spoiled before the pandemic because hotel prices were fairly reasonable. And my 2 hotel rooms last week, and it was not a stunningly beautiful hotel. Let me just say that. My bill was over $600 for 2 nights. So yeah, totally get that. The price of living is a little stressful right now too. Justice said things going on in personal life, which could be any number of things. March Madness bracket totally busted. How much worse could anything get, right? If your March Madness bracket is totally busted. But you know what? Now let's just take that seriously for a second. And maybe you meant that seriously, Joe. But what I'm thinking of is if there's something that you've been looking forward to and it falls apart, it can be stressful, can it? Or it can be negative. Let's put it that way. Or you can just be a little down about that. It's very, 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 very human to go through those kinds of emotions. So there are a lot of reasons. I have several down myself. I wrote down personality clashes, because there are certain people that I just have trouble interacting with because of our personalities. And I study this stuff. Illness, it could be headaches. It could be, I've got an upset stomach. It could be a chronic illness. It could be allergies. It could be anything. Personal relationship issues. And those come up for everybody at some time during life, for some more than others. The job isn't a good fit and it can make people negative. Financial issues, good, bad, indifferent. People say that people win the lottery are just in a world of hurt. I'm thinking I'd like to try that, but I don't play. So it would be tough for that to do. Sometimes you just have a plain old bad day, don't you? So we need to be aware that that's part of the negativity that might be coming at us as well. Sometimes simply responding with empathy can be effective. You can hear them. You can try to understand. It doesn't mean you have to agree with them, but just hearing people and trying to understand where they're coming from, being kind, but firm if necessary, especially if they're on this negativity bandwagon that you're trying to overcome. You might still need to be firm. I hear your frustrations. I am so sorry this is happening. Let's look at some solutions that we might come up with, because staying here in this negativity is just making you feel worse. And so sometimes you have to be kind but firm. So the next category is, could you be part of the negativity problem? Ouch. I have been before. I've caught myself doing that before. I have my pet sitter is a really good friend of mine, and sometimes one or the other of us gets into this little negativity pit. It's not real deep, but it's a negativity pit. And one of us will say a comment that draws the other one back out. So I'm very thankful for that. But in what kinds of circumstances do you find yourself becoming negative? Would you type that into the chat box? Eek, Jacqueline, I totally hear you. I was in a downtown in a big city last week, and I could easily get negative about that. People cutting me off, people giving me wrong directions, hopeless situations. Absolutely, Robert. It's hard not to be negative, isn't it? I actually read a letter from my late husband this morning. I tend to read those occasionally. the anniversary of his death just passed last week. And so he's top of mind right now. And I was reading a letter and he was talking about his health and how much worse it had gotten in the previous year. And it was kind of a hopeless situation for him. He always had hope, bless him. He always ended his letters with, I know this year is going to be the best ever. But you could hear throughout the letter that maybe that isn't really how he felt. So yeah, it's hard not to be negative, isn't it? Meg said, when I get overstimulated. Yes. Meg, I don't know if you've ever read the book, The Highly Sensitive Person. That was a very helpful book to me as a sensitive person. I'm not talking necessarily about empathy, sympathy, sensitivity, although that's a piece of it, but also about sensitive to light, loud noises, lots of flashing, those kinds of things. So that might be a helpful book for you by Dr. Elaine Aron. Healthcare. Oh, my goodness. Traffic. Yes. Really uncertain situations. Life feels kind of uncertain sometimes, doesn't it? Teenagers. Yes. Family. Sometimes just let's not even pin it all on the teenagers. Sometimes it's just family. Gwendolyn said, feeling like I am being disrespected. It's so funny you said that, Gwendolyn, because I have in my own notes being treated unfairly. And I feel like I'm being disrespected. Never ending problems that don't seem to ever have a solution, no matter how much time has gone by. Exactly, Robert. And so when we fall into that kind of a negativity trap where they're not going to have a solution, we need to look at what we can do to offset it, right? Because there isn't any solution. I can be negative about being a widow. What is my solution? Well, people have said, maybe you'll want to retire someday. And I said, never, if I can help it, because that helps me stay engaged with life. And I think that helps offset any negativity for me. So be aware, sometimes we are part of the problem, right? Tips for overcoming your own negative thoughts. Stop thinking at the extreme end of the spectrum. Don't overgeneralize. You know how that is. They always do this. This will never happen. I can always manage to do something wrong. I never get the schedule that I want. Those kinds of things. That's the extreme end of the spectrum, and it's overgeneralizing. And when we do that, we draw ourselves into the negativity. So watch for those words. Always, never, completely, everything, everybody. When we do that, we convince our minds. Our minds are really, 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 really unique, because when we focus on these kinds of things, our minds start looking for confirmation of that. Scary, isn't it? If I start saying everybody always does this, then guess what my mind does? It looks for the next instance of when somebody's going to do that to me. We create neural pathways, synaptic connections. And what I think of it as, because I'm a very visual person, is in my mind are these roads of what I think about. And they start out just being these nice little dirt roads, little pathways. And then the more I think about it, I add gravel to those roads. And the more I think about it, I pave the road. And that road that I've just created of negativity is a lot harder to dig up when it's paved, because I've added so much to it. So be aware of that, and be aware of the roads you're creating in your own mind. Don't filter out the positive. And we tend to, because there's so much negativity coming at us in the news, in social media, in our workplaces, in our families. It is the way of the world. And so we don't even see the positive anymore. That's why I subscribe to inspiremore.com, so that I get that dose of positive. There are days when I look through the topic listings and I think, okay, none of these really hit me today, and I don't even read them. But usually there's at least one article or one video or one story or whatever that lifts me up. So I try not to filter out the positive by completely dismissing it. Don't decide you're a mind reader. Usually it's not about you, because nobody's even paying attention to you. Somebody said that to me the other day. Nobody really even cares if I'm thinking that or doing that, do they? And I said, well, in general, no, because we're all concerned about ourselves. That's how we're made. So you're not a mind reader. You don't know if they're really thinking bad things about you. But let me give you a really blunt example of this. You walk into a room of your coworkers. There are 7 of them there. And as soon as you walk in, they stop talking. What do you think? Type it into the chat box. Must have been about me, Tara. That's exactly right. Now I'm upset, right? I'm reading their minds. What did I just miss? It's something happened. So I'm going to read their minds. I want to address Robert's question. Does overgeneralization cause or does it lead to confirmation bias? I believe they are synergetic, I will say. I believe they are intermingled because our minds create those thoughts. We look for things that confirm those thoughts. Then it always is that way. It never is that way. So it's kind of a loop, isn't it? We have those thoughts, and then that's what it's something at the base of our skull. All of our senses enter through the base of our skull through a little piece of our brain called the reticular activating system. And because our reticular activating system knows that we've got 5,317,000 things coming at us every day, or it seems like that, right? It says, I need to look for what Robert has been focusing on. Robert seems to have been focusing on a lot of negative stuff lately. And since we've got all this stuff coming at us, and after all, a lot of it's negative anyway, I will filter that out for him so that the negativity is what he sees. And so now I have confirmation bias, don't I? And because I have confirmation bias, now I can start to see that everything coming at me is negative. So now I'm going to overgeneralize because not everything in the whole world is negative. So yes, to answer your question, yes, as a loop, I kind of look at it that way. Gwendolyn said they might be thinking they don't want me to know what they're talking about. And they might be planning my birthday party. Would we ever think that? Probably not. Did that answer your question, Robert? Did that make sense? Thank you. What really fascinates me is how our minds will look for the things that we're thinking about. It's sort of like if you buy this beautiful shade of a red car that you have never seen before in your life. You love your red car. You're so excited to drive your red car. You drive out the driveway, and within a day or two, you start seeing those red cars everywhere because that's what your mind has been focused on, and that's what it's picking up on. The red cars have been there all along, but that's not what you were focused on. So that's a little simplification of that, but it totally is true about how we look at negativity, which is why I never watch the news. Just saying. My reticular activating system does not need any more negativity coming at it. Don't internalize negative events. So many times they don't have anything to do with us, right? So let's not make it about us. Let's just say, well, I have a friend. I have two friends actually that dwell when there's a high profile trial of some sort going on. The Casey Anthony trial a few years ago, one of my friends watched it from the time she woke up in the morning till the time she went to bed. And you talk about double negativity. Anything else that she happened to see was just over flooded with all the negativity of that trial. My pet sitter watched the Alex Murdaugh trial, and it just influenced pretty much everything she had to say while she was watching it. And they were internalizing it as if they said, oh, aren't you going to watch that? I said, you know what? I have no control. The highly sensitive person, Sandra, is Elaine Aron, and that is spelled ARON. And it's called the highly sensitive person. It's abbreviated to HSP. So what I was telling him about these things that they were dwelling on was that since I don't have any control, it just frustrates me. I had a friend once that was emailing me all these negative things about people hurting animals. And I said, I will not even open these links because I have no control over it. And it just makes me sick to my stomach. So don't internalize negative events. Fend them off as much as you can. Robert said, when I buy a new car, it seems like I start to see that model everywhere I go. Exactly. Usually in that color too, right? Because that's what your mind is picking up on. So it is fascinating to know how really intricate and complicated our brains are. We don't give them enough credit, I don't think. Don't try to enforce your own rules. I am guilty of this. I will just admit to it right now. I have a certain way of thinking and believing, and I can't understand why other people don't have a certain way of thinking and believing. I think we all have that to some degree. So I have to step back and say, it's just not the way they see things. And I have to let it go. Don't let your imagination go into overdrive. Sort of like the same thing with walking into that room. Our imaginations go into overdrive a lot of times, don't we? Well, I didn't get that email. Well, it must be because I'm not included. No, somebody left us off or they put an extra L in the email address and I didn't get it. So that's all that is a lot of times. But we tend to imagine that we are being slighted on purpose, we are being left out, whatever it might be. Sometimes if you are being negative, write it down. This is very effective. What's the worst that could happen? What's the best that could happen? What's the most likely middle of the road that could happen? This is very helpful. One of the reasons it's very helpful, oddly enough, is that if you write down the worst that could happen, your brain sort of starts mulling over a plan B. If you write down what's the best that could happen, your brain gets a little happy about that and says, well, yeah, it might go that way. And then the brain goes, okay, so yeah, probably not likely either one of those. What will happen? But suddenly you're more prepared for something that you've been worrying about because you wrote it down. Worst, best, and most likely can be a very effective technique. Not for everything, but I've used it before and it just sort of clears my mind when I do that. Don't throw the negativity net over everything when something goes wrong. It's very easy to do, isn't it? Of course, that's going to happen to me. Why wouldn't it happen to me? You know, we drop the milk in the morning and we start fretting and fussing and saying, that figures, I knew that was going to happen. I knew that today's Monday and the work's going to be terrible, blah, blah, blah. Stop it. Do cast the positivity net when you can. Look for the silver lining, like I said earlier. Practice reframing whatever you're thinking about. Well, I dropped the milk jug, but it wasn't glass, so I don't have glass shattered all over. The cats were in the other room, so I don't have to worry about them getting into it and being a mess. Do you see how that reframing can help? Am I happy I dropped the milk jug? Of course not. But I can reframe my thoughts about what actually happened during that incident. Stop creating a new reality based on your own negative imagination. People, let's an example, self-checkout at the library. People's new reality became, and I actually heard this, administration is just trying to find a way to cut out jobs. And in effect, the person that I heard that from told me later, there was no job cut. They were trying to find ways to help people do their jobs more effectively and have more time to do their jobs by having self-checkout. So that person had created a new reality without the facts. And then I will also add, started some gossip about it, which was negative, which was drama. So do you see how this can really work on us and be difficult behaviors? And don't read negativity into someone else's actions. It might be there, but you don't have to read negativity into everybody else's actions. I love this phrase. Do I rise and shine or rise and whine? Do you get up in the morning and say, oh, I have to go to work today? Or do you say, I get to go to work today? You're telling your brain how to think about today. Do you rise and shine or rise and whine? Recognize that a lot of negative thoughts come from the direction of your focus. If you're looking back, a lot of your negative thoughts will be guilt, anger, resentment. If you're looking forward, your thoughts will be worry, fear, anxiety. This person that wrote this book, and I can't remember her name right offhand, Emotional Agility, that I'm just now reading, but she talks about, now I can't remember what she calls it. They start with B's. I just read it this morning. I apologize. But she talks about two kinds of behaviors when emotions take over. Blockers, I think, is one of them. And I can't remember the other one. But anyway, what she's talking about is we're either looking forward or we're looking back. And in reality, we need to handle our emotions in the moment. So she's exactly talking about emotional intelligence. She just doesn't call it that. So let's look at some specific difficult behaviors. We're going to go through these quickly, simply because it's kind of, like I said earlier, that mini manual you can have, but they're very common difficult behaviors. There are a lot more of them out there, but we're going to handle some specific ones. There's the tank, who's trying to get something done, and you know them because they're on a mission. They push you around. They rip you apart personally sometimes, not always, but you know, they kind of roll right over you, don't they? And they can be rude and insulting. So that is the tank difficult behavior. And some of us work with people like that. Some of us are this when we're dealing in our weaknesses. What do you want to do? You want to command respect, not be aggressive, not be in their face. How do you do this? You hold your ground. That's called being assertive. I'm going to hold my ground because this is what needs to be done. And sometimes you can interrupt the attack by sometimes just lowering your voice or getting quiet completely or folding your hands and looking them straight in the eye. You tend to de-escalate the volume and the intensity of their attack because you're commanding respect. Then there's the whiner. This is the person that wallows. Oh, why can't we ever do this right? Why don't they ever tell us this? It's that kind of thing. They have a sense of futility. And if you think about the title of the whiner, you're going to hear it in their tone a lot of times, aren't you? But here's the trick. This is why it's a difficult behavior. They don't offer any solutions. Sometimes they don't even want any solutions. It's easier to wallow, isn't it? So this is the whiner. They're trying to get everything right. It should be this way and it's not this way. And so I'm going to whine about it. What do you want to do? You want to form a problem-solving partnership, because if you solve their problems for them, they will never try to solve them on their own. You can help them, but they won't try to solve them on their own. So how do you do that? You listen for main points, because they can go on and on and on with this whining thing. You interrupt tactfully. You want to get the specifics so that you can help them problem solve on their own. Focus on solutions. Yeah, but what? Yeah, but this is a yeah, but person. Yeah, but what if they do this? Well, we're going to look at this piece of it. And this is how we can solve this particular problem. And then when you can, track progress. Go back up to that person and say, hey, Linda, I noticed that when you did this that we talked about the other day, things got a lot better with that person, or whatever it is. Remember, what gets rewarded gets repeated. And sometimes the reward is simply that you have affirmed them and affirmed their behaviors. The nothing person just wants to get along. They don't want to rock the boat. They withdraw. They don't want to say anything. They occasionally boil over. So this person can tend toward being passive aggressive. They're usually passive until they boil over. But the challenge with this difficult behavior is they don't give you a lot of feedback. So you really don't know where they stand. You really don't know what you're supposed to do about it. So what do? What would your goal be? Well, you want to get them to talk so that you can actually find out what they are feeling, and then you can start to resolve it. How do you do that? You blend. You say, if you're like me, you're blending with them. If you're like me, this whole situation has been kind of frustrating. Then you show them the future. Help me understand what we can do to make it better. You're moving them forward. You're getting them to talk. You're showing them that you understand what they might be feeling. You don't necessarily understand it completely, but you understand what they might be feeling, and you show them the future. You want to find common ground with those people. Then we have the grenade. Now, in the book, and the book is called Dealing with People You Can't Stand, and I picked it up because of the title. And they talk a lot about different kinds of behaviors. Some of them are very nuanced and so forth, but I know that I've heard about these many times over the past 15 years that I've been dealing with library folks. They call it get appreciated, this particular motivation behind the grenade. I call it get attention, because when somebody blows up, to me, they just want attention. And it's an immediate demand for attention. They do blow up, they lose emotional control, and the cycle tends to repeat itself. So just think about a grenade. It's immediate, it blows up, you can't control it, and there's a good chance there's going to be another grenade following that. So what do you do about this? Your goal with these people is to take control of the situation, because it's out of control right now. I haven't been the subject of this very often, but I used to work in an environment where this happened way too often. And it was very uncomfortable, even for the people that weren't the subjects of this. But I got to observe this, and somebody needed to take control of that situation, because this person will just keep going on and get louder. I will also say that sometimes these morph into each other. So if a grenade isn't getting what they want right at the beginning, they can turn into a tank, or vice versa, right? Because if a tank's not getting what they want, they could blow up. So be aware that these difficult behaviors aren't always just cut and dried in your one little scenario here. But these are tips that help you not only define what the difficult behavior might be in your own mind, but to figure out how you need to deal with that difficult behavior. How do you gain control of the situation with the grenade? Get their attention. This does not mean being a grenade. I had somebody show, and they weren't talking about this, but they were showing how you can get people's attention. And I was in a face-to-face workshop as a participant, and they walked up to the table and they slammed their head on the table and they said, "Everybody talk." And they screamed it, and everybody got really quiet, because they only saw the action and the body language. They didn't listen to the words. So it kind of shows that you can get people's attention without being this screaming, yelling person. Again, one really effective way to do this with a grenade is to simply lower your own tone and to speak quietly. They have to quiet down. If you're speaking that quietly, they're going to get quiet. Some people use a technique of not speaking, not responding at all. even when the grenade is expecting you to, and just maintaining eye contact, because it suddenly dawns on them that what they're doing is not working with you. You want to reduce the intensity, don't you? And if you can, because grenades, remember, it repeats the cycle, you want to practice prevention when you can, right? Do you have any questions? I know we went through those kind of quick, but it's one of those things where I know you won't use them. You know, the difficult behaviors with the negativity and so forth and the emotional intelligence are an ongoing thing. These are a little bit more sporadic, but I wanted you to have these tools so that you can go back and look at them. Maybe you have somebody in your personal life that's a grenade or a tank or whatever. These should be able to help you with those things. A lot of it has to do with being assertive, doesn't it? Taking control, demanding respect, all those kinds of things. Do you have any questions about anything we've covered so far? We're going to be wrapping up here in just a few moments. I don't want to talk over the top of you if you've got questions. So I'm going to give you just 30 seconds to address any questions. Put those in the chat box and then I'll address them for you. Okay, I don't see anything popping up. You know you have my email address, which I am going to type in here again, just so you have it. Linda's workshops at gmail.com. If anything comes up after the program or something was a little deeper than you could get into in the chat box, drop me an email. I'm always happy to respond to those. First of all, it helps me know that you were engaged, and I love that. But secondly, I'm the objective observer. I have no vested interest in whatever it is you're telling me. So if I give you some feedback and you like it, you can use it. And if you don't, you can delete it and I will never know. So it's a win-win from that perspective. So what we basically have been talking about all 90 minutes, not quite yet, of this program is one of Stephen Covey's guidelines in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which is still very appropriate. Seek first, thank you, Joe. Seek first to understand and then be understood. But think about this. This kind of ties into how well we listen. On a scale of 1 to 10, just type in a number of how good of a listener you are. 1 is, huh? And 10 is you are really tuned in. Just no right or wrong answers. Just want to see where you think you land. And I would venture to say that for most of you, the number would change depending on the category I gave you. If I said, Robert, did you write 0.8? Did you mean to write 0.8? Oh, I see some 9s. Okay, good. That worried me. It might be. I've been around people that have a 0.8. But what I'm thinking of here is if I gave you a category of significant other, it might be an 8. If I gave you a category of a patron, it might be a 10. If I gave you a category of people rating you, your teenager might rate you a 1. Your 4-year-old would rate you a 10 if they even understood. Your 30-year-old would rate you a 10. Do you see what I'm saying? We listen differently in different categories. But the thing with seek first to understand, then be understood is the reason we don't, thank you, Robert, the reason we don't listen as well as we could, not should, but as well as we could in some circumstances is the biggest reason is we are usually forming our responses. Now, guess what? If we are forming our responses, our emotions are getting the best of us, aren't they? So we're right back to emotional intelligence again as to whether we are actually a good listener or not. We talked about listening and emotional intelligence, but there are a number of reasons. We could name at least 10, maybe 15 of why we don't listen as well as we could in certain circumstances. But the number one reason studies have shown is that we are busy forming our responses in our own minds. So if we're doing that while we're listening, are we really seeking first to understand and then be understood? Possibly not. So I think this is just a good guideline. I remind myself of this occasionally when something's going on. I think, what? Are you kidding me? And then I have to step back and say, try to understand. And when I do that, generations is a good area that this comes into play, because I just read something again today where somebody was, it was an HBR, Harvard Business Review. They were doing a class very expensive class on generations. And when I read the description, it's very much like what I talk about. And they said, you will learn the experiences and the situations that have influenced why these generations behave this way. And it's exactly what I talk about in my programs. So it's a matter of seeking first to understand and then be understood, because we're not going to change them. We're not going to control them. You are not going to change or control the people with difficult behaviors, but you can understand them better, and then you can be understood. And most importantly, you can use your emotional intelligence to interact with them differently. So remember what I mentioned at the beginning: between stimulus and response, there's a space, and in that space is our power. We have that power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. So that's pretty significant. On your handout, if you've got it there in front of you, it says sketch a visual representation of a difficult behavior stimulus and your typical response. That's something you can do later. But if you think about it, the walls of your mind, I read this once, the walls of your mind will never remain blank. So that middle blank space is your mind. There's what's happening, the stimulus. Here's how I typically respond, but in that middle space is where you have the power to choose. So if you have a chance right after this program, sketch a visual representation of that same stimulus and the response you'd like to have next time, because you took the wall of your mind and you put something on there that was going to help you make a more positive choice. So again, if you have any questions for me, let me know. I hope you'll think about which tips you're going to use to ensure a better chance of having your preferred response with difficult behaviors. So think about that. What was your most meaningful takeaway from today's webinar? Would you mind typing that into the chat as we wind up today's webinar? Thank you. To listen instead of react. That's so hard, though. We are just instinctively answering before they ever get their whole sentence out, aren't we? And Meg said, you can't control others' behavior, but you try to control how you react. Yes. Take a breath. Yes, there's that space, right? That's all. I need to look within myself, because it's not always good to react. Our emotional skills are really fundamental. Yes. And they can be improved, but they are fundamental to everything. I mentioned emotional intelligence in so many of my programs, and people maybe get tired of hearing it, but I don't think you can hear it enough, because it's something we forget from day to day. Marianne said, practice positive affirmation when appropriate. Yes. Let people know they're on the right track. Robert said, my greatest takeaway from this webinar is my new mantra: I am glad that I don't live in their mind. I love that. My sister would be so proud that somebody was taking that as their mantra, Robert. And I told her that. I said, I'm going to use this in workshops. And she had very low self-esteem, so she just thought I was making that up. But I've used it a lot, actually. Sandra said, usually forming my response while listening. Introvert trait? No, it's a human trait, Sandra. I'm just going to give you that. We tend to think more. I'm an introvert too. So we tend to think more inside our heads, but actually introverts tend to be less likely to respond quickly, simply because they're thinking it through. Humans form our response while we're listening. It's more of a listening issue than an introvert extrovert. Introverts, however, do tend to think more thoroughly about what they're going to say before it comes out. Linda said, emotions play a large part in how we react to others. Yes, they certainly do. And Amanda said, the importance of managing our emotions, controlling our responses instead of trying to control the other person. But Amanda, don't you wish I could have a webinar on how to control the other person? This webinar would be so filled, we'd have to have it 3 times a week. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. If you need me for anything, please drop me an email. I love to hear from you. Thanks again.